WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Brent Jacobson of Mosinee is the Republican candidate for the 87th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Brent Jacobson, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks for participating in
Sure.
our candidate interviews. I want to start by asking you, what's your campaign's key message? Why are you running for this office?
Well, I'm running for this office because I got into this race because I really felt that Wisconsin was at a critical juncture of going one way or the other, politically speaking. The Supreme Court has turned, I think we can all agree, to a liberal majority versus it had been for some time a conservative majority. And obviously we don't control the governor's mansion, and that may not change until, well, it's not going to change one way or the other until 2027. So the legislature was really the last thing that Republicans controlled, and I think in our country and in our state, we're at quite a divergence of opinion on a number of issues on how to move this state forward and what we think is best for the state of Wisconsin and the country. And I really did feel that we were at a critical juncture here in the state of Wisconsin. We needed solid candidates with good backgrounds and good ideas. I'll be coming up on 10 years in government now, serving as the mayor of Mosinee, serving on our county board. I felt I had a good track record. I've gained experience in a number of areas, made a number of good partnerships in a large part of the district that will be part of the 87th Assembly District if I'm successful. So I felt I certainly was qualified, and I've got the motivation to do it. And my message to voters was I was getting in to keep a good representative in this seat.
So if you're elected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you to introduce?
Well, I think, I have an interest in a number of areas. One of the areas I've expressed an interest in is child and family issues. My wife and I had some experience in the private adoption process. Ultimately, we ended up, however, conceiving a child of our own, and actually we're expecting another one here this spring.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But we started in the private adoption process for some time, and it was an experience that I think there's a lot of cost and red tape in the process that prevents families who, people who would make a great home for a son or daughter. It prevents them from having that opportunity, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, they're not in a position to conceive one of their own. So I really, I think there's a good opportunity to make more connections between expecting mothers who don't feel they're ready to be a parent, and a couple that wants a child more than anything, and we can really work on streamlining some of that process. And so that's an interest of mine. Obviously, I've also always advocated for, I think Wisconsin needs to become economically competitive by moving towards elimination of the state income tax. I recognize the reality of the situation. That's not going to happen overnight by any means. I'd like to see us start by working towards a flat tax and eventually working towards eliminating the state income tax. We just become more competitive economically, and I do think you make up for the money that you lose in things like more increased economic activity that generate more sales tax revenue and just more jobs coming to the state, more employers coming to the state, staying in the state.
If you're elected, you'll be entering the assembly where the state's projected to have more than a $2 billion surplus. $3 billion, actually. What would be your top two priorities for use of that surplus funding?
Top priority would be returning to the taxpayers in the form of tax cuts, tax credits. Also, I think we need to look at some more tax, not necessarily handouts, but ways to incentivize workers in the child care industry. That would be a focus of mine as well. It's just becoming so costly on daycares, for instance, to try and attract workers and pay a wage while still making it affordable for parents to send their children to daycare. I'm not necessarily looking at tackling it from the let's put more money in the pockets of the families to get the children to daycare. I want to look at putting the money in the form of tax credits for especially rural daycare workers to incentivize people to enter what is a really tough industry, because I feel that daycare is the workforce behind the workforce. It's very true.
What about K-12 education? That's a leading issue for many voters. Where does K-12 education fit in your campaign platform?
Well, I think public K-12 education, I went through public K-12. I had a great experience. Of course, that was some time ago. But I just feel there's a number of school districts, not all of them, but a number of them in the state of Wisconsin, where we've lost our focus. I really do feel we focus too much on gender identity, the proper pronouns, X, Y, and Z, and we've lost focus on math, history, science, some of the basics, and we've also lost focus on putting a lot of our energy into teaching some of the trades within our high schools, woods, metals,
What can the legislature do about that?
Well, what the legislature can do about that is, first of all, incentivize directing more money to these school districts to have it spent on particular curriculum within their school district. If you don't want to offer these programs, then don't expect increased aid, for instance. I'm very leery of just continuing to increase per pupil aid across the board, because it's not directing the money to the school districts that, one, are performing the best, so there's no accountability, and two, the ones that need it the most, which are some of these school districts in our rural communities. We have to look at, if we're going to direct more money into K-12, I'm more interested in talking about things like looking at increasing sparsity aid, for instance, for some of these rural districts and things like that. So it's more categorical aid to K-12 than just this continuous across-the-board per pupil aid increases. And in the next budget, I think Governor Evers is going to have to be honest this time when it comes to if he wants more funding for public K-12, because we saw with a stroke of a pen a complete disregard of the state legislature's intent when he increased per pupil aid for the next 400 years. And we want honesty as a Republican majority, if we retain the majority. We want honesty in negotiating the budget with the governor. And I thought that was a 180.
What about higher education? About four-year colleges, two-year colleges, technical colleges across Wisconsin? What does that system look like to you in the future, and what's the legislature's role in that?
I think we have to start having the discussion about how can we encourage people that are going to enter the UW system or a technical college system to stay in the state of Wisconsin. It's a disappointment where we educate these folks and then they leave and they're more productive elsewhere. And the way to do that, I think, is really to look at, how can we increase opportunities for employment within the state of Wisconsin when they come out of the system. And a lot of that goes back to having a strong economy, looking at ways, for instance, like I said, elimination of the state income tax, things of that nature, that we can be a stronger competitor within the U.S. and keep people here within our system.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address it?
I think we already touched on that. One of the largest workforce development challenges, if you go to a lot of employers and talk with them, two things they mention, obviously inflation, cost of materials, cost of living. The other thing is childcare. It's getting to a point, especially when you move beyond one child to 2 or 3 children. Either you're discouraged from having children because you don't want to leave the workforce, or you find yourself in a position where you are leaving the workforce because it just doesn't make economic sense anymore to pay for the cost of having 2 or 3 children in daycare and then trying to get to your job every day, sending all your money right back into daycare. So I think childcare is one of the biggest crises that we have to tackle for workforce development. And there is a lot of things that could be done. on the Marathon County Board, I just voted to support spending $200,000 of our American Rescue Plan Act dollars on child care worker scholarships. So again, I voted for that plan not because it's just taking money and sending it out to people to use towards child care. It's actually a workforce development initiative to create scholarship opportunities to increase child care workers. So there's a lot of things we can do to tackle that issue, and I think it'd be a great benefit for workforce development.
2 more workforce questions for you. Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Certainly I'd like to see our local and our state residents be hired for those types of jobs, but I'm leery of making it a requirement because I'm always leery of inserting the government into, private business. So, again, I want a Wisconsin resident, but I also want the most qualified worker on the job, and if that unfortunately means it's someone not from the area, okay. And, I also want the cost of that job ultimately to be low, especially if the taxpayer is going to be involved in some respect. So it's a competitive process. And if the most qualified labor, but also, the best bidder on the job means it may not necessarily be local or Wisconsin, I'm okay with that. Again, a lot of it I think comes down to I'm leery of the more and more requirements you put on private businesses bidding on projects. So.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I'm aware of the issue, not necessarily the extent to it but in terms of my response to that is, we have a test through DWD for what classifies as an independent contractor. It's a number of factors. It's on the employer or the would-be contractor to prove that individual is an independent contractor, not an employer. And if that means DWD needs to do a better job of getting out in the field more and investigating this and auditing it, I'm completely fine with that because I don't want to see a company that's following the rules be disadvantaged, or a worker that's following the rules be disadvantaged to someone who's not and just decides to, oh, that's an independent contractor, or pay cash under the table to avoid the tax consequence. I mean, one, that's I suppose borderline illegal and or illegal, and it's skirting the system. So what would I do about it? I mean, I really do think we need to get on DWD to be a little more of a watchdog than it is. And frankly, that extends even beyond your question to things like the welfare system. I mean, we have people in the state that can go in, tank an interview intentionally so they don't get the job, check the box, and continue on the benefits. And unless the employer goes through the task of reporting it, DWD is not catching it. Well, they should be if we're going to invest in their agency. So,
transitioning to housing. Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and what best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control, or building more rentals, or some other solution?
I think the other solution is we need to get on top of the housing industry to encourage single-family residential development. We really need to get people into single-family homes so they can start creating equity and credit in their life. It was very difficult for me in my 20s when I was battling student loans and on a limited salary to try and buy my first house, but I did because I knew I needed to create equity. We really need to focus on housing development to get people out of the rental system. Rental prices continue to rise, but I'm not in favor of rent control because, all it does is it makes it harder for the housing market to compete and get these people to transition. And really, I know a house isn't for everybody, but I really do feel it's good for the long term. For a lot of us, it's a major retirement asset someday.
So should the state be incentivizing that single-family home development?
Yes.
Okay. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
We could talk for half a day on that. There's a lot of things we can do, starting with improving access to care and lowering the cost of it. I'm a big fan in these rural areas of finding ways we can expand telehealth. You just got a simple congestion that's staying longer than it should. Do you need to get an appointment, wait, get in to see the doctor or the nurse practitioner, pay a higher cost? Could you just use some telehealth? I think so. So I certainly am a fan of developing telehealth. Also a fan of, there are so many things that can be done at the nurse practitioner level, but unfortunately they're required to be done at the MD level. I am a fan of expanding care that a nurse practitioner can provide, because it's at a lower cost as well, and it can probably be delivered faster than waiting to get in to see the MD. So those are some things we can work on.
Do you support increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rate to hospitals?
What I don't support increasing, I want to be very clear on this, I don't support increasing the level to access Medicaid.
For an individual, right?
Correct. I would support looking at increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rate, and I think the federal government should look at increasing the Medicare reimbursement rate. And the reason I support those two would seem like different things, but they actually they should do is drive down private health insurance costs, because when the doctors aren't making anything on Medicaid, and then if you're going to expand the program on top of it, all you're doing is, to make up for it elsewhere, they're turning and looking to the private health insurers who are insuring the hardworking middle class, and then you're seeing higher deductibles, higher premiums, because that's the only place that you can look to, and that middle class gets squeezed and that private health insurance market gets injured. So yes, I understand the rates need to be increased. I'd be okay looking at that. I think the feds should look at the Medicare rate. I'm not a fan of expanding the program. I think Walker did the right thing by not taking the money during ACA to expand that program, because we would have been stuck with an even tighter squeeze on the private health insurance market.
What about mental health care? It's a growing concern for many Wisconsinites and concern for state and county budgets. What are you hearing about mental health care in the district, and what are some solutions?
Yeah, mental health care, it's only gotten worse and worse. And, I hear it from local law enforcement especially. They're spending a significant amount of their time in the public safety sector dealing with mental health cases. I have actually been working across the aisle, even though it's a nonpartisan job. We, even at the local level and our county board, we have an ideological divide. I've been working across the aisle with others on the county board to talk about ways we can increase case managers right here in Marathon County for mental health cases and crisis response. Two different things. You've got the crisis and the response, but then what happens to the person in case management after that? So we can take some of the work off the backs of local law enforcement and get them back dealing with violent crimes, drugs, etc. The other thing with mental health is, unfortunately, a lot of it we saw come out of COVID. With the shutdowns, we had people isolated, away from friends, away from family. You saw depression, anxiety, suicide go up. So we're dealing with the effects of that right now, and I think we have to remember that if we face a pandemic like that in the future. But all about increasing access to mental health, because it is a serious thing. And the problem is it can lead to more serious things like alcohol and drug dependency, and let's hope not beyond that, crime. So,
how should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
I'm proud to be endorsed by Pro-Life Wisconsin, and what that means is I'm one of those that is a no exceptions person. And this really goes back to some of the discussion we had at the beginning of the interview. I just truly do feel that there are so many opportunities out there for us to work on expanding ways for expecting mothers who don't feel they're ready to be a parent, to bring a child still into this world and into the life of people who want nothing more than to be parents.
Transportation. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed, and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Yeah, it's a problem everywhere, and especially in rural Wisconsin, where we just don't have the tax levy base anymore, the cash to fix roads like we used to even back in the 90s. It's always about, we're always borrowing and trying to limp along each year. We have to start looking at ways. One of the problems with general transportation aid when it goes to a local government is it doesn't all have to get spent on transportation. It just goes into your big piggy bank. I'd like to see ways where we can start ensuring that the money is actually spent on roads so these municipalities don't fall behind. That means expanding things like the LRIP program, Local Road Improvement Program, Bridge Aid Improvement Program for counties and small towns. So I think we should work on that. But we really do have to start looking at ways to generate more revenue on the transportation side. I am certainly not interested, especially in this economy, in entertaining a gas tax increase. It's already crushing enough for families to fill up the tank and put food on the table and do everything else in this economy. But we do need to start looking at ways that we can. I'm not going to abandon the tolling idea someday. I think we should continue to investigate that option. I mean, we have to pay to drive into Illinois, but Illinois doesn't have to pay to drive into here. And I know there's a lot of hoops to go through with that, but we have to start looking at ways to bring in more revenue to the to the transportation department. Another problem is bidding. They're required to go out and get 2 bids. I had a personal experience with this in my community. We had a section of Highway 153. It was supposed to be redone. Finally, the year came along. They go out for bid. They're going to get 1 bid. It's American Asphalt. They end up getting 1 bid. It's American Asphalt. But they go out for a second bid. They're going to get 1 bid. It's American Asphalt. But guess what? Now it's delayed another year and the cost has went up. We just have to start using common sense in some of these projects.
PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
Yeah, I'm not. PFAS is an issue. It's a health issue, but the question is, at what point? I am terrified for how the city of Mosinee, a city of 4,500 people that I've headed for almost the last 10 years, is going to afford to deliver water anymore through the city system if the federal standards of 3 parts per trillion are implemented. We've been battling with the DNR back and forth, fluttering right around the 20 parts per trillion, which isn't even the law. 70 parts per trillion is the law. And when you look at some of our other countries, like in Europe or Canada, I forget which one. One's at 700 parts per trillion, one's at 300 parts per trillion. If we're talking about 3 parts per trillion, this will be another example of a federal and state mandate that is unfunded, put on the backs of local governments. Wassa water rates just north of us, are out of control because of the amount of money they decided to invest to do a complete elimination of PFAS. We have safe drinking water. We're fluttering around the 20 parts per trillion right now. We're continuing to investigate ways to find new water sources within the community and always make it better. But you have to balance the standard with the cost of delivery. You just really do. Otherwise, people on fixed incomes cannot afford water rates that we would have to incur to reach that federal standard.
We are down to our final 2 questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
Well, I haven't got much of a chance to talk with my opponent yet. I introduced myself once during the primary when I ran into him. I would say experience on my end. I've been in local government for almost 10 years. I know he's been in local government as well, but I also have private sector experience as a small business owner. I practice law full time. Been practicing since 2011, 2010 actually. I lose track of time. But also am now part owner in my law practice. That means dealing with the same issues that other small business owners have to deal with, providing benefits, retirement, insurance to our employees, dealing with providing a competitive wage so we can attract employees. So, I have both the private sector and the public sector experience, and also being from kind of the center, as I believe, of the new 87th Assembly District. I've, as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, already had a chance to build a lot of good connections at the local level with local leaders, and a big part of that district through my job as mayor and also on the county board. So I have the public sector experience, the private sector experience, have built up the relationships with a lot of people already in the district, and I think I do a fantastic job for constituents in Madison.
Final question for you. Let's say you're elected this fall. You get a magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties together. What would that issue be?
Well, I don't know that it's a magic wand. I don't know that it's one issue. I just think it's a discussion, right? We need to start talking again. I watched most of the vice presidential debate last night, and I actually got done and said to some folks this morning, I said, I've followed politics since probably 1992, and I said that was probably the most civil debate I think I've seen since probably 1996. Because it was a discussion between two candidates who don't agree on many, many things, but they can find ways to agree on some things because they truly believe in it. And I think we just need to, even if we're not going to support someone else's idea, we need to listen and start talking more, and I think Madison will start working better. We've just, especially with new elected officials, and I do not intend to be like this, they come in and think they're still on the campaign trail. You're not still on the campaign trail. You're there to get the best stuff done for the state of Wisconsin. So my hope is when I get to the state capitol is to talk to anybody, even if I'm not going to support their idea. So.
All right. Thank you, Brent Jacobson of Mosinee, Republican candidate for the 87th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Brent Jacobson, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.